Claire Jennings never imagined she would leave Virginia. The girl who once spent evenings on her porch swing, listening to crickets and reading spy novels, now found herself standing on a runway half a world away. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, the kind of heat that pressed against your chest and made every breath feel like swallowing fire. Afghanistan wasn't just another country. It was another planet. The mountains towered like jagged teeth. The air carried a sharp tang of dust. And diesel, and the hum of distant helicopters was constant, like a heartbeat of war. At 24, she was young for her assignment, younger still for the weight it carried. Her role was simple on paper: intelligence analysis. She was supposed to observe, record, and piece together fragments of information. In Virginia, her world was signals and screens, quiet nights and secured rooms, her face lit by the glow of a monitor. She deciphered radio chatter, mapped out strange signals, and learned to find patterns in chaos. "You won't need a weapon," her supervisor had reassured before deployment. "Your job is knowledge, not combat." But as she stepped from the transport plane into the glaring Afghan sun, Claire already sensed that reality was different here. Soldiers in dusty uniforms moved with practiced urgency, weapons always within reach, scanning the horizon even inside the safety of the base perimeter. She caught herself staring at the rifles slung across their backs, trying to imagine what it must feel like to carry one. Heavy, serious, final. She shook the thought away. She wasn't a soldier. She was here to discover, nothing more. The first days blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion. She set up in a cramped operations tent where the air conditioning wheezed, but never won the battle against the desert. Wires tangled across tables. Screens flickered with grainy drone footage. Maps were taped to walls, layered with pushpins and scribbled notes. Claire adjusted quickly. She always had a talent for finding order in mess. She worked long hours, headphones pressed to her ears, listening to intercepted chatter, her fingers dancing over keyboards. But at night, when the base quieted, she lay awake in her cot, listening to distant gunfire echoing across the mountains. Each pop reminded her of the truth war wasn't data. It wasn't lines on a screen. It was out there, alive and far, closer than she wanted to believe. On the fifth morning, her commanding officer ordered her into the field. "We need eyes on a canyon route," he explained, pointing to a jagged path traced on a map. "Locals say smugglers run through there. You'll ride with Bravo team. Gather what you can: frequencies, signals, anything unusual." Claire's stomach tightened. She had never imagined leaving the safety of the base so soon. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Sir, I am not trained for patrols." He gave her a look that was neither cruel nor comforting, simply factual. "Jennings, intel doesn't come from behind screens. Sometimes you have to step into the noise to hear clearly. You'll be safe. They'll protect you." Safe. The word tasted fragile. Hours later, she found herself bouncing in the backseat of a Humvee, the desert wind whipping through the open window. The convoy moved in single file, 3 vehicles, dust trailing behind like ghosts. Claire sat squeezed between 2 soldiers, who smelled of sweat, metal, and sand. Her gear laptop, headset, a stack of frequency charts rested on her lap. She wore no rifle, only a sidearm she wasn't sure she could even load properly. The soldier on her right, a broad-shouldered sergeant with tired eyes, glanced at her gear and smirked. "First time outside the wire, ma'am?" Claire nodded, forcing a small smile. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled without humor. "You look like someone headed to a library, not a canyon." The soldier on her left, younger, leaned forward. "Don't worry. We'll keep you alive. Just stay low if things get loud." She laughed nervously, but her palms were damp. The casual way they spoke of danger reminded her that for them, firefights were routine. For her, even the thought was surreal. The road narrowed as they approached the canyon. Towering cliffs loomed. On both sides, jagged and ominous. Shadows swallowed the vehicles, the bright desert sun vanishing behind walls of rock. Claire's pulse quickened. Her training told her canyons were choke points, dangerous by nature. But this wasn't a simulation. This was real, and every instinct screamed caution. She adjusted her headphones, scanning frequencies. Static filled her ears. She tried to focus, logging signals, looking for patterns, anything unusual. Her hands moved quickly across her keyboard, but her mind wandered to the terrain. Every ridge felt like eyes watching. Every dark crevice seemed to breathe. The driver muttered something under his breath. Claire caught the words. "Bad ground. Don't like this." The sergeant beside her shifted, his hand resting on his rifle. "Eyes up, boys," he called to the others. Claire's breath hitched. She tried to bury herself in her task, to believe she was just an observer, invisible to the world outside. But when she glanced through the window at the canyon walls, she felt it, the prickling certainty of danger. Her supervisor's words replayed in her mind. "You won't need a weapon." For the first time, she doubted him. The convoy rolled deeper, engines echoing off stone. Dust swirled behind them, swallowing their trail. Silence thickened, so complete. It felt unnatural. Even the radio chatter from the soldiers quieted, each man locked in his own vigilance. Claire swallowed hard, her throat dry. She forced herself to keep scanning frequencies, typing notes, doing her job. But something inside her shifted. She realized discovery wasn't safe. It wasn't distant. It was here, in the dust and shadows. In the canyon that seemed to hold its breath. And though she told herself she was only an analyst, only a quiet girl from Virginia, a voice inside whispered otherwise. Because in places like this, fate didn't care about job descriptions. And something Claire didn't know what yet was waiting to find her. The first crack of gunfire split the canyon like thunder. Claire's head snapped up, heart leaping into her throat. 1 second, the convoy was moving cautiously through the jagged shadows of rock walls. The next, the air was ripped apart by a storm of bullets. Sparks flew from ricochets, and the deafening roar of automatic fire drowned out all other sound. Dust billowed around the vehicles, turning the canyon into a choking, spinning blur of brown and gray. Every instinct she had screamed at her too. Hide, to curl into herself and disappear, but there was nowhere to disappear to. The Humvee lurched violently, tires skidding over loose gravel, engine screaming as the driver wrestled for control. Claire's fingers clutched the edge of the seat, her knuckles white. She tried to focus on her task gathering intel, but there was no time. There were no screens, no frequencies, just raw terror and the overwhelming scent of burning rubber. And dust. A rocket impacted near the lead vehicle, sending a spray of dirt and shrapnel into the air. The Humvee ahead jolted and skidded sideways. "Get down!" The sergeant beside her shouted, his voice hoarse but commanding. Claire dropped. Flat to the floorboard, stomach pressed against the metal plate beneath her. She could feel the vehicle shaking, her laptop sliding dangerously across her lap. Bullets pinged against the armor with a sound like metal drums. The younger soldier she had been sitting beside ducked, pale-faced, whispering curses. Claire could hardly breathe. She wasn't trained for this. She had never fired a rifle in her life. All her knowledge was theoretical, a world of signals and patterns, not screaming men and flashing barrels. But then her eyes caught movement. A figure in the canyon wall, silhouetted by sunlight, weapon aimed directly at the convoy. Her stomach nodded. The sergeant's shoulder was slashed by a ricochet, blood seeping through the fabric. He groaned and gritted his teeth, crawling toward cover. Claire felt paralyzed for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for the world to shift. "Jennings," the sergeant barked, his voice shaking yet sharp. "Take it." Her head whipped toward him. He was pointing at the dirt beside her, where an M4 rifle had slid to a stop. Claire's hands trembled as she stared at it. The mat. Black steel seemed to hum with danger, an alien weight in the dust. She had never handled a weapon like this. She wasn't supposed to. Her job was analysis, not killing. But then another volley tore through the canyon, the Humvee jolting like a leaf in a storm. Her instinct screamed. Her fingers closed around. The rifle, palms slick with sweat. The metal was heavier than she expected, but solid, real, immediate. She could feel the life and consequence in it. The sergeant's eyes locked on hers. "Sight the target. Breathe, don't jerk." Claire nodded almost imperceptibly, though her brain screamed that she couldn't possibly do this. Yet somehow her body moved. She raised the rifle, her hands shaking so violently she thought she might drop it. The figure on the ridge leveled. His weapon, taking aim. Time slowed. She counted her breaths, a trick she had read about in a survival manual. 1, 2, 3, and fired. The recoil jarred her shoulder violently, sending a shockwave up her arms. Her first round missed, clattering harmlessly into the canyon wall. Her stomach sank, but she didn't let go. Another breath. Another squeeze. And the second round struck true. The figure flinched and dropped behind cover. A third, and the ridge went silent. Claire's chest heaved, her heart pounding in her ears. She hadn't thought she could do it. She had been a quiet observer, someone who deciphered patterns, who hid behind screens and walls of data. And now she had killed, or at least, she had acted in a way that might have ended a life. The weight of it pressed on her in a way she hadn't anticipated, yet there was no time to dwell. The canyon was still alive with danger. Another Humvee jolted violently as bullets tore through its armor. Claire's pulse raced. She leaned forward, trying to stabilize the rifle. Her aim was shaky, but she could see the enemy moving between rocks. They were using the terrain with deadly precision, flanking the convoy. Her hands tightened around the weapon. This wasn't about analysis anymore. It was survival. And somehow, instinct had replaced fear. She tracked the enemy, fired, adjusted, fired again. The sergeant beside her moved with precision, shouting commands to cover angles, to drag the wounded to safety. Claire followed, mimicking every movement, trusting him in a way she hadn't thought possible. She had thought her role was passive, but the battlefield demanded otherwise. Her quiet analytical mind shifted into something primal calculation under fire. Each shot counted, each decision measured in life or death. The younger soldier peeked from his cover, trembling. I can't see him," he stammered. Claire's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Focus on his left flank. I've got the ridge." She sounded like she belonged here. She sounded like a soldier. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She was starting to believe it herself. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time blurred into a relentless roar of engines, bullets, and shouted commands. The canyon seemed alive, breathing. Around them, waiting. Claire's clothes were coated in dust, sweat streaking her face. Her arms ached from gripping the rifle, fingers numb from tension. She had fired more rounds than she could count. And yet, somehow, they were surviving. Finally, the firing ceased. Silence descended, heavy and unnatural. Claire's ears rang. She lowered the rifle, hands shaking violently. Around her, soldiers were checking wounds, loading magazines, and taking cautious breaths. The sergeant beside her touched her shoulder, grimy fingers sticky with blood. "You did good, Jennings. You saved lives." Claire couldn't speak. Her throat was dry, her mind spinning. She had never imagined herself here, in this moment, in the chaos of life and death. She had come to observe, to record, to analyze. And yet she had been forced to act, to take lives, to hold the line, to survive. And in doing so, she had discovered something she hadn't expected. A part of herself she didn't know existed. Her hands still gripped the rifle, reluctant to let go. She felt a strange mix of fear and empowerment, shame and pride. The canyon had changed her, forged her into someone who could survive in the chaos she had thought she would only observe. The convoy regrouped. Wounded were secured in the back of the Humvees. Drivers checked engines, rifles reloaded, radios crackled with calls for status reports. Claire took a moment to sit back, her body trembling, dust coating her skin like a second layer. She stared at the canyon walls, expecting more enemies, more danger, but for now, silence reigned. And in that silence, Claire realized the truth. She had not just discovered enemy movements today. She had discovered herself. Her mission, originally intended to be passive, had forced her into action. She had crossed a line she never wanted to cross, and yet the line had become part of her. She would never be the same. And as the convoy moved forward, deeper into uncertain terrain, she understood one thing clearly. Discovery sometimes demanded courage, and courage sometimes demanded violence. She had learned both in a single, terrible, exhilarating moment. By the time they reached the temporary outpost that evening, the sun was a bloody smear against the horizon. Claire stepped out of the Humvee, shaking uncontrollably, but unashamed. She had survived. She had acted. She had discovered more than signals and data. She had discovered her own capacity to endure, to protect, to confront fear and uncertainty head on. And though she didn't yet know it, the rifle resting in her hands would not be the last time she would have to reach for it. The outpost was small, a temporary cluster of sandbagged walls and shipping containers pressed into a dusty clearing at the canyon's edge. Claire stepped out of the Humvee, her legs unsteady, the rifle still heavy in her arms. She was coated in sweat, dust, and grime, the stench of fear lingering around her like a second skin. Soldiers moved with quiet urgency, checking weapons, tending to wounds, shouting for status updates. Everything smelled of gunpowder and blood. For Claire, every sound was amplified, each shouted command, each metallic clink, each low groan of pain reverberating in her chest. She sank onto the edge of a sandbag, lowering the rifle with trembling hands. The sergeant beside her, still bleeding from a shallow shoulder wound, gave her a nod of acknowledgement. You kept your head out there. That's what mattered. Claire shook her head, disbelief etched across her features. I don't know how I did it, she admitted. The words felt alien, even to herself. She had come to Afghanistan to observe, to decode patterns in silence. And yet, today, she had acted, pulled the trigger, and faced death directly in a canyon where bullets didn't negotiate. A medic approached, gently brushing dust from her arms. You're going to be sore tomorrow, he said softly, examining her for injuries. Claire flinched at the thought. Aches and bruises felt insignificant compared to the mental weight pressing on her chest. She nodded mutely, still staring at the rifle. The young private who had whispered to her in the Humvee hovered nearby, fidgeting with his helmet. I thought we were done for, he said, voice trembling. His eyes were wide, still reflecting. The shock of survival. You were amazing. Claire stared at him, and the words struck her like a hammer. Amazing? She had survived. She had fired a weapon in real combat, yes. But amazing implied heroism, skill, control. And in reality, she had been terrified, fumbling, desperate. She had been lucky. Yet somehow, The canyon had transformed her from a hesitant analyst into someone capable of decisive action. That night, sleep evaded her. She lay on the cot in her tent, the sounds of the outpost echoing faintly, the hum of generators, the occasional distant gunshot, the murmur of soldiers on watch. Claire replayed the ambush over and over in her mind. The way the Humvee lurched, the ricochets, the smell of burnt rubber, the flash of rifles on the ridge. She could feel the recoil in her shoulder, the strain in her arms, the adrenaline still pulsing through her veins. Her thoughts kept returning to the figure she had fired at. The image wasn't clear, only a silhouette, but the thought of having taken action against a living person was inescapable. She had crossed a line she had never intended to cross. And yet, she couldn't deny the strange sense of clarity that followed. In that moment, she had discovered something elemental. Fear could be harnessed, controlled, and used. The sergeant returned to her side, finally sitting down on the edge of the cot. "You handled yourself well?" he said again, quieter this time. "Most wouldn't have touched a weapon, let alone hit anything. You saved lives today." Claire nodded, too drained for words. The weight of his statement pressed on her chest like a stone. Saved lives. That phrase echoed in her mind, intertwined with the image of blood and dust. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't supposed to be. Yet somehow, the battlefield had demanded her presence, her action, and she had delivered. Over the next few hours, the outpost became a temporary hive of activity. Soldiers filed in with reports, radio transmissions crackled, and the wounded were evacuated. Claire assisted where she could, passing notes, scanning frequencies, and even offering directions for tactical adjustments. She found herself talking to soldiers in a way she hadn't before. Her voice carried authority because it was grounded in recent experience. They listened. They respected her. And for the first time, she realized that her role wasn't confined to analysis alone. By dawn, exhaustion had settled into her bones. Claire walked toward the edge of the outpost, rifle slung loosely over her shoulder. The sun rose over the jagged peaks of the canyon, bathing the landscape in red and gold. It was beautiful, terrifying, and alien all at once. She stared at the mountains, feeling a profound dissonance. Nature here was indifferent to human struggle. The rocks, the wind, the heat, they did not care who lived or died. Yet human lives had intersected violently with this indifferent landscape, and she had been an unwilling participant. A gentle voice broke her reverie. "You're going to need to talk about it," the sergeant said, stepping beside her. He gestured to the canyon below, still pocked with debris from the ambush. "You've changed today, Jennings. You can't pretend this didn't happen." Claire swallowed hard. She wasn't ready to speak about it. Not yet. Words felt insufficient, but she nodded. In silence, they stood together, watching the canyon. She realized that the rifle had done more than save lives. It had altered the way she saw herself. She could no longer view the world purely through screens and signals. Action had consequences, and she had wielded them. In the following days, Claire's routine shifted. She spent time with soldiers, observing drills, watching their interactions, and learning how they moved in sync with danger. Every step felt like a lesson. She learned how to scan a ridge without flinching, how to anticipate movement, how to balance fear with calculation. And while she still carried her analytical tools laptop, headphones, frequency charts, the rifle never left her side. It had become both a burden and a symbol, a reminder of the day her theoretical world collided violently with reality. At night, she wrote reports as usual, documenting enemy movements and signal patterns. But her observations were now tinged with lived experience. She could interpret tactical behavior with a depth that only first-hand danger could provide. Soldiers began to consult her, not just for intel, but for insight. Claire, the quiet analyst, had become a bridge between observation and action. Yet sleep remained elusive. Dreams were filled with flashes of the canyon, the crackle of gunfire, and the ghost's shadowy figure on the ridge. She would wake, heart pounding, and reach automatically for the rifle, even in her tent. Her mind refused to let the line between analyst and soldier fade. She realized that the canyon had taught her a truth she couldn't unlearn. Discovery sometimes required participation, and survival sometimes demanded courage. One evening, the young private who had witnessed her first shots approached hesitantly. I never thought I'd see someone like you do that," he said softly, voice low to avoid being overheard. You're not like anyone I know." Claire met his eyes, fatigue and resolve reflected there. "Neither am I," she admitted. "Neither am I." The days that followed were tense. Intelligence reports hinted at enemy activity nearby, and the soldiers prepared for potential contact. Claire practiced with her rifle, under the sergeant's supervision, each movement precise, measured, purposeful. She learned to hold the weapon, steady, to anticipate recoil, to trust instinct and logic simultaneously. Every shot fired reinforced a strange duality. She was both the observer and the participant, the analyst and the protector. By the end of the week, Claire had earned quiet respect from the unit. Soldiers who once doubted her capabilities now glanced at her with deference, aware that she had confronted danger and survived. But Claire herself remained uncertain. She hadn't expected to step into combat. She hadn't expected to feel the rush of life and death decision-making. And yet, she couldn't deny the clarity it brought. As she sat one evening, rifle resting beside her and laptop open on her knees, Claire realized she had crossed a line. There was no going back to purely observing. The canyon had changed her, forged her in a crucible of fear, adrenaline, and action. And though the weight of that knowledge was heavy, she understood that it had also given her a gift, the ability to face uncertainty with eyes wide open. Tomorrow, the convoy would roll again. More mountains, more ridges, more unknown threats. But Claire knew she was no longer just a quiet analyst from Virginia. She had discovered a strength she hadn't known existed, and though it came at a cost she was only beginning to understand, she would carry it with her, alongside the rifle. That had first awakened it. The canyon, with all its beauty and terror, had claimed her innocence. In return, it had revealed her courage. And Claire Jennings, once a girl who read spy novels from a porch swing, now understood the discovery was not passive, it was lived. It was earned, and sometimes it was terrifyingly immediate. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks when Claire awoke, muscles stiff, joints aching from the ambush the week before. Her body was bruised, sore from the unforgiving ride through the canyon, but her mind buzzed with clarity. For the first time, she recognized a strange rhythm in fear. It sharpened senses, focused thought, and forced decisions she would have once avoided. Today, she would ride again. She would move through the same terrain that had terrified her, but with a purpose. Beyond observation. She wasn't just recording signals anymore. She was part of the signal herself. The sergeant approached, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the horizon as if the mountains could speak. Today's patrol won't be simple, he warned. Intel suggests increased activity along the canyon's main route. Expect engagement. Claire nodded, feeling a strange steadiness. Her rifle leaned against the wall beside her cot, heavy and reassuring. She had practiced with it for hours since. The ambush. She knew its weight, its recoil, its temper. She knew how to trust it, and in turn, how it demanded trust. The canyon had taught her lessons that manuals never could. The convoy moved out, engines humming, dust swirling in long veils behind the vehicles. Claire adjusted her position in the Humvee, her hands resting lightly on the rifle's grip. The young private rode beside her, still nervous but steadier than the first patrol. "You're not scared this time?" he asked tentatively. Claire glanced at him, lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm aware," she said. "There's a difference." Awareness had replaced the paralyzing terror of her first encounter. She felt it coursing through her veins like electricity, sharp, alive, precise. The canyon walls loomed, jagged and indifferent, the sun casting sharp shadows across the gravel road. Claire scanned every ridge, every crevice, every silhouette. That could hide danger. She noticed small details, a rock dislodged too perfectly, a shadow that lingered too long, a glint of metal. Her analytical mind worked in tandem with her instincts now, each reinforcing the other. A sharp whistle split the air, and the convoy jerked to a halt. Claire's head snapped toward the sound, rifle raised instinctively. Down the canyon slope, figures moved between the rocks, cautiously, methodically. She counted 5, then 6, enemy combatants. The sergeant whispered, barely audible, "Take positions. Cover fire on my mark." Claire dropped low behind the sandbags in the Humvee's frame, heart pounding in a precise rhythm. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, its cold weight anchoring her focus. Her breathing slowed, each inhale deliberate, each exhale controlled. She was no longer just the analyst. She was part of the battlefield now, an active variable in the deadly calculus of survival. The first volley came, crackling like fire through dry grass. Bullets struck metal and stone, ricocheting in unpredictable arcs. Claire fired instinctively, each shot deliberate. The figures froze, then ducked behind cover. She adjusted, fired. Again, missing by inches but buying the convoy time to maneuver. Every nerve screamed terror, but clarity overrode fear. Each round carried weight beyond the metal. Each decision could tip life and death. One of the young soldiers beside her faltered, trembling as he tried to return fire. Claire's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus on the left flank. Cover the ridge. I've got this side." Her command surprised even her. She sounded like someone who had done this before, and somehow she had. The canyon had trained her in. Hours, what most would learn over months. The firefight escalated. Dust swirled around them, bullets whistled overhead, and the air tasted of gunpowder and heat. Claire's hands ached from gripping the rifle, arms trembling from recoil and adrenaline. Yet she fired again, taking careful aim at movement between rocks, timing each shot with precision. Her analytical mind dissected patterns of motion, predicting enemy positions almost like reading a map. Instinct and intellect blended seamlessly, a strange duality forged by necessity. A grenade exploded near the rear Humvee, throwing dirt and shrapnel into the air. Claire ducked instinctively, rifle raised, eyes darting to locate the source. The sergeant beside her barked commands, pulling soldiers to cover and checking for injuries. Claire followed, moving swiftly, silently calculating angles, trajectories, and timing. Each decision was measured, each movement critical. Fear remained, but it was harnessed, sharpened into tool-like precision. Minutes or what felt like hours passed in a blur of dust, sound, and flashing rifles. Claire's ears rang, heart hammered, but she refused to falter. Each shot she fired was calculated, deliberate. Each decision weighed against potential outcomes. Her analytical training merged with newfound combat instincts, creating a flow she had never known existed. The line between analyst and soldier blurred, melted into something new, terrifying, and exhilarating. Finally, the enemy began to retreat. The canyon fell silent, except for the hum of engines and the crackling of distant gunfire fading into echoes. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, hands trembling but steady enough to keep it ready. She exhaled, chest heaving, sweat streaking dust across her face. Around her, soldiers checked weapons, assessed injuries, and exchanged brief nods of acknowledgement. The young private beside her looked pale, wide-eyed. I didn't think anyone could hold that ridge like that," he stammered. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm just reacting," she said softly, though she felt the truth resonate differently. She was no longer just reacting. She was participating. She was calculating, predicting, surviving. She was someone who could wield knowledge and action in tandem, and she had just proven it. The convoy continued through the canyon, now more cautious but steady. Claire kept her eyes scanning, ears tuned to every whisper of movement, every sound of shifting gravel. Her fingers itched to take notes, to record data, to map enemy positions, but now she understood that observation and action were inseparable. One fed the other, one required the other. Knowledge without courage was impotent. Courage without knowledge was reckless. She had discovered this truth in the heat of battle. That night, at the outpost, Claire cleaned her rifle with meticulous care. She lined up each component, checking for damage, wiping away dust and grime. It felt ritualistic, almost sacred. The weapon had saved lives. It had demanded trust, obedience, and precision. And in return, it had taught her the weight of responsibility, the magnitude of consequence. Sleep did not come easily. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to distant chatter, the hum of generators, the faint wind in the canyon. Each memory of the day's firefight played vividly in her mind. The feel of the rifle in her hands, the flash of the enemy, the crack of bullets against metal, the raw terror and clarity intertwined. She had survived. She had acted. She had discovered herself under fire. Over the following days, Claire's confidence grew. She practiced with the rifle each morning before patrols, running drills with soldiers, learning proper stances, breathing techniques, and sighting adjustments. Her analytical skills enhanced her combat abilities. She began predicting enemy movements based on patterns she noticed in terrain and behavior. She was no longer the quiet analyst from Virginia. She was a bridge between intelligence and action, capable of both observation and execution. Her interactions with the soldiers deepened. They respected her not because she had fired a weapon, but because she had adapted, survived, and thought clearly under fire. She had earned a quiet place among them. And yet, Claire knew the canyon had changed more than how others saw her. It had changed her. It had awakened something essential, the knowledge that fear and courage were not opposites, but partners, guiding each decision, shaping each movement, and forging a strength she had never known existed. As another sunrise cast gold over the canyon ridges, Claire slung her rifle over her shoulder once more. She glanced at the mountains, aware of the dangers lurking in every shadow, every fold of rock. The canyon no longer seemed alien. It was a test, a teacher, and she was learning. She had crossed the line between observer and participant, and there was no turning back. The battle had not yet ended. And Claire Jennings, the quiet analyst who had once believed her world ended at a laptop screen, now understood something fundamental. Discovery demanded action, and action demanded courage. The canyon had given her both, and it would demand them again. The morning air was thin and sharp as Claire awoke on her cot, sunlight spilling through the canvas walls of the outpost. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known possible. The soreness of muscles, unused to repeated exertion, mingled with bruises from the previous patrol. But it wasn't physical pain that weighed heaviest. It was the residue of the canyon, the echo of bullets, and the knowledge that she had crossed a line she never thought she would. The rifle leaned against her cot, its dark metal smooth and cold, reminding her that survival had come at a cost. Sleep had not been restorative. Dreams had turned the canyon into a relentless theater of flashing shadows and gunfire. Every movement in the dark made her startle. Every sudden sound in the camp set her heart racing. Yet she also felt a strange clarity in these dreams, a heightened awareness of danger, of timing, of patterns. Fear had become a teacher, carving precision into her thoughts, forcing her to confront the unexpected with a combination of instinct and calculation. She rose slowly, muscles stiff, and moved to the weapon. Cleaning it was ritual now, each motion deliberate. Every bolt, every chamber, every sighting adjustment demanded attention. The rifle had saved lives, and it deserved respect. It demanded respect, not as a tool of aggression, but as a companion in the unpredictable calculus of survival. Her hands, though trembling slightly, moved with growing confidence. The sergeant approached, eyes scanning the surrounding ridges. "You handled yourself well yesterday," he said quietly, not with praise, but with acknowledgement. "But battles like that don't end in one canyon. They're lessons. They shape you. Are you ready for the next one?" Claire nodded slowly, the weight of her previous actions pressing down on her, but also fueling her resolve. "I'll be ready," she said, and she meant it. Breakfast in the camp was silent, broken only by the metallic scrape of utensils against trays. Soldiers ate quickly, conserving energy, keeping alert. Claire observed quietly, taking in patterns she had ignored before, the way eyes flicked to cover, the subtle tension in shoulders, the small rituals each man performed before patrol. Observation had always been her strength. Now she combined it with lived experience. She noticed details others overlooked. A shift in wind, the placement of rocks that might conceal movement, the way distant shadows bent and swayed unnaturally. These weren't just data points, they were potential threats, insights into survival. After breakfast, Claire joined the sergeant and a few soldiers for a briefing. A large map of the canyon was spread across a sandbag wall, lines and pins marking known enemy positions, recent movement, and potential ambush sites. Claire's laptop rested beside the map, screens flickering with intercepted communications and thermal imagery. She had taken to cross-referencing both in real time, correlating patterns she observed with intelligence. Enemy scouts had been spotted along the northern ridge, the sergeant explained. "We need to recon. Be ready for engagement." Claire felt her pulse tighten, but it was not panic, it was focus. She reviewed the ridge in her mind, calculating sight lines, cover points, and probable enemy positions. She formulated strategies, not for herself alone, but for the unit. Her role had shifted. She was part of the plan, and the plan depended on her accuracy, judgment, and calm under pressure. The convoy rolled out again, engines humming, dust swirling in long veils behind them. The canyon stretched before them, a labyrinth of rock, shadows, and potential danger. Claire adjusted her rifle on her lap, fingers brushing the cool metal, feeling its reassurance. Each shot she had fired before had taught her something essential. Precision was not instinct. Alone, it was a combination of knowledge, control, and awareness. As they approached the northern ridge, she scanned every movement, every irregularity in the terrain. There a shadow flitted between two boulders. She marked it silently, noting direction, speed, and likely purpose. The sergeant noticed her. "Focus. Good eye," he muttered, eyes narrowing. He trusted her judgment now, and she knew it. Then it happened. The ridge erupted in gunfire, bullets whizzing past the Humvee, striking metal, stone, and earth with terrifying force. Dust exploded into the air, stinging eyes and filling lungs. Claire reacted instantly, gripping her rifle, arms tensing. She had practiced this moment in drills, but reality was more brutal, more chaotic. She adjusted her stance, aimed and fired, tracking movement between rocks. Her first rounds were accurate, scattering enemy positions, buying precious seconds for the convoy to maneuver. She could hear the shouts of soldiers coordinating behind her, the distant rattle of weapons, the sharp commands of the sergeant. Her mind was a combination of instinct and calculation. Angles, wind, distance, timing. She was no longer an observer. She was integral, decisive, alive in the chaos. The firefight lasted for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Each decision was critical. Each movement carried consequence. Claire's arms ached from recoil. Sweat stung her eyes. Dust filled her lungs. But she remained. Focused, precise, unflinching. Fear existed, but it was disciplined. A tool rather than a hindrance. A young private faltered beside her, panicked by the sudden intensity. Claire's voice cut sharply, calm yet commanding. "Cover the flank. Watch the boulders. I've got your side." He obeyed, steadier now, eyes reflecting trust she had earned. The sergeant watched silently, noting her emerging leadership, the rare combination of analysis and action she now embodied. Finally, the enemy began to retreat, leaving behind scattered gear and the echo of defeat. The canyon fell silent again, dust settling, engines humming, the air thick with gunpowder and tension. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, breath ragged, hands trembling. Around her, soldiers checked weapons, assessed injuries, exchanged quiet nods of acknowledgement. She had survived again, but more than survival, it was mastery, born of necessity, discipline, and instinct honed under fire. Later, at the outpost, Claire sat alone, rifle cleaned and laid carefully beside her, notebook open on her lap. She wrote methodically, recording every observation, movement patterns, enemy tactics, terrain anomalies. But her notes were different now. They carried weight. They were informed not just by observation, but by lived experience, by first-hand exposure to life and death decisions. Sleep was impossible that night. She lay awake, memories of the firefight flashing behind her closed eyelids, muzzle flashes. The smell of gunpowder, the terror and exhilaration intertwined. She thought of the soldiers she had helped protect, of the private she had steadied with her voice, of the sergeant who had trusted her in the moment of chaos. And she realized, quietly, terrifyingly, that she had changed irrevocably. Morning came, gray and soft over the canyon ridges. Claire rose slowly, muscles still sore, eyes sharper, mind clearer. She knew that the canyon would test her again, and soon. Every patrol, every ridge, every shadow held danger. But she also knew that she had grown. She had discovered courage, precision, and clarity. She had discovered herself. As she slung the rifle over her shoulder for the third patrol, she felt a strange mix of dread and resolve. The canyon was indifferent, dangerous, and alive, but she was no longer naive. She had survived, acted, and learned. Discovery was no longer passive. It demanded participation, courage, and a willingness to confront fear directly. Claire glanced at the mountains stretching before her, jagged and menacing. The canyon would challenge her again. She would face uncertainty, danger, and chaos. But she was ready. And for the first time, she felt a sense of quiet certainty. She had crossed the line from observer to participant. She had survived the crucible, and she would continue to discover, no matter what the canyon demanded next. The sun had barely pierced the canyon walls when Claire rose, muscles stiff but mind alert. Sleep had eluded her again, as it had since the first firefight. Each night, the canyon haunted her dreams, its jagged ridges, the flash of rifles, acrid tang of gunpowder. Yet she also awoke with clarity, a sharpened awareness she had never known in Virginia. Fear had transformed into focus, terror into precision. Claire now understood that survival demanded both courage and intellect, each feeding the other. Breakfast in the outpost was subdued, the hum of conversations tempered by the weight of the previous days. Soldiers moved like ghosts, checking weapons, adjusting packs, and sharing whispered tactical updates. Claire sat quietly, observing the subtle patterns of behavior. Even in casual gestures, the way hands hovered near triggers, the way eyes swept the ridges, she found valuable intelligence. She realized that understanding human behavior under stress was as critical as analyzing enemy signals. Her rifle rested against the sandbags, polished and ready. She ran her fingers along the metal, feeling its reassuring weight. In a way, the weapon had become an extension of her mind, translating calculation into action. Each round fired in the canyon had been more than survival. It was an expression of decision, timing, and clarity under pressure. And with each patrol, she felt herself merging more fully into this dual existence, analyst and combatant, observer and actor, mind and muscle united by necessity. The sergeant approached, hand raised in a brief salute. "We've got a recon. Patrol scheduled along the southern ridge," he said. "Intel suggests enemy movement through the narrow pass near Grid 6. You're coming with me." Claire nodded, a sense of calm settling over her chest. This was no longer an assignment she dreaded. It was an opportunity to apply everything she had learned. She double-checked her gear rifle loaded, scopes aligned, ammunition secured, headset functional. Every detail mattered. Precision was survival. She carried more than equipment. She carried responsibility. The convoy moved out, engines humming, tires grinding over loose gravel. Dust rose behind them in long, swirling clouds, reflecting the first rays of sunlight. Claire's eyes swept constantly across the canyon walls, noting anomalies, shadows, and subtle movements. The soldiers around her trusted her now, glancing occasionally to confirm her insights or follow her lead. She felt the weight of that trust, heavy but motivating, pressing her to remain vigilant, decisive, and aware. As they approached Grid 6, the canyon narrowed, rocks jutted sharply on both sides, and shadows deepened. Claire instinctively crouched, rifle raised, scanning the terrain. She spotted movement, a subtle glimmer of metal against a distant rock. She marked it silently, calculating angles, probable trajectories, and likely enemy positions. The sergeant leaned close. "I see it. What's your take?" Claire's voice was steady, precise. "Two enemies, moving slowly along the ridge. One is likely scouting. The other covers the flank. If they advance, we'll have a window of 15 seconds to neutralize before they can call reinforcements." The sergeant nodded, impressed. "You're thinking like a field commander now. Stick with me. Stay sharp." The first shots cracked through the morning air like fire. Bullets ricocheted off stone, dust erupted, and the convoy jolted violently. Claire's reflexes took over. She fired, tracking the scouts with precision, adjusting for distance and elevation. Her arms ached, lungs burned, but her focus was unshakable. Every movement was deliberate, informed by pattern recognition, honed over weeks of observation, and reinforced by hard experience. The enemy returned fire, exploiting natural cover, attempting to flank the convoy. Claire anticipated the movement, firing carefully, buying the soldiers around her time to reposition. She shouted instructions, her voice calm but commanding. "Left flank, move. Cover the ridge. Don't let them pass the boulder cluster." Her words carried authority, backed by action. The young private beside her obeyed instantly, steadier than before. The firefight lasted for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only minutes. Claire's mind calculated angles, wind, trajectories, and timing simultaneously, each calculation followed immediately by action. She could see patterns in the chaos, the enemy's behavior, their tactical responses, their vulnerabilities, and she exploited them with precision. The G rifle became an extension of her observation, translating mental patterns into life-saving action. A grenade exploded near the rear of the convoy, sending debris into the air. Claire ducked instinctively, then raised her rifle to cover a prone soldier scrambling to reload. Her body moved in rhythm with the battlefield, anticipating threats, protecting all eyes, and making calculated decisions under extreme stress. Fear remained, but it had become a tool rather than a hindrance. She was no longer reacting blindly. She was acting deliberately, decisively, with control. The enemy began to withdraw, leaving broken cover, scattered equipment, and echoes of retreat. The canyon fell silent, except for the hum of the Humvees and the distant crackle of spent rounds. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, chest heaving, eyes scanning for residual threats. Around her, soldiers assessed weapons, checked injuries, and exchanged quiet nods of acknowledgement. The young private, still pale but steadier now, glanced at her. I didn't think anyone could hold that ridge like you did," he admitted. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not about holding," she replied softly. "It's about understanding the battlefield and acting decisively." She realized her voice had taken on a new authority, born of experience and sharpened judgment. Back at the outpost, Claire cleaned her rifle with meticulous care, the ritual grounding her. She documented the engagement in her notebook, not just noting enemy movements, but analyzing her own decisions, the reactions of her fellow soldiers, and the subtle cues that had saved lives. Her notes were no longer purely analytical, they were informed by lived experience, a fusion of intellect and action. Sleep again came in fragmented waves, interrupted by flashbacks of the canyon, the flash of enemy rifles, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Claire felt the psychological weight of each decision she had made. The lives she had influenced, the soldiers she had protected, the bullets she had fired, all lingered in her mind. And yet, she also felt a strange empowerment, a recognition that she had grown into a role she had never expected, one that required both courage and intellect in equal measure. The following morning, she joined the sergeant for a debriefing. "You've adapted quickly," he said, scanning the canyon beyond the outpost. "You're thinking ahead now, not just reacting. That's rare. Most analysts can't do what you just did." Claire nodded silently, absorbing the weight of the statement. It wasn't pride that stirred inside her. It was a sober acknowledgement of her growth. She had survived, adapted, and learned. She had become someone capable of both observation and decisive action. Over the next week, Claire continued to patrol the canyon, each mission reinforcing her dual role. She anticipated enemy movements, guided soldiers with calculated instructions, and took decisive action when threats arose. She learned to harness fear, sharpen instinct, and translate knowledge into life-saving decisions. The canyon had become her teacher, the rifle her instrument, and her mind the analytic engine driving strategy. By the end of the week, the unit recognized her as more than an analyst. She had earned their trust, their respect, and most importantly, a place among them. Yet Claire understood that this recognition came with a cost, the psychological weight of combat, the memory of bullets, the knowledge that every decision could mean life or death. She accepted it because she had no choice. Survival demanded it. As the sun set over the canyon ridges, Claire sat quietly, rifle cleaned and laid carefully beside her, notebook open. She wrote with precision, documenting not just enemy positions and movement patterns, but reflections on her own actions, her reactions, and the evolving role she had assumed. Discovery was no longer passive. It demanded courage, action, and responsibility. and Claire Jennings had discovered herself fully in the crucible of the canyon. Tomorrow, the canyon would challenge her again. But for the first time, she felt prepared, not naive, not untested, but ready. She had learned to navigate fear, harness knowledge, and act decisively. She had crossed the line between observer and participant, and she would continue to walk that line, rifle in hand, mind sharpened, heart steady. Claire understood now. The battlefield was a teacher, the canyon a crucible, and survival a lesson in courage, calculation, and self-discovery. The morning air was crisp, almost deceptively calm, as Claire stood outside the outpost, rifle slung over her shoulder. Dust clung to her fatigues, dried sweat streaking her cheeks. She felt the weight of the canyon in a way she hadn't on previous. Patrol's not the physical weight of jagged rocks and loose gravel, but the psychological gravity of what lay ahead. Each ridge, each shadow, each whisper of wind could conceal danger. The canyon had become alive in her mind, a teacher, a threat, a mirror of her own evolving courage. The sergeant approached, scanning the horizon with a practiced eye. "We've got movement near the eastern approach," he said quietly. "Intel suggests a small enemy cell scouts, likely monitoring our patterns. This one's tricky." Claire's eyes narrowed. She studied the canyon floor and ridges, noting angles, shadows, and possible vantage points. Her mind raced, cross-referencing previous patrols, enemy behavior, and terrain patterns. This wasn't just analysis. It was anticipation, prediction, and preparation. Her rifle felt like a natural extension of her thought process, translating calculation into action. She nodded at the sergeant. "I can take the lead on surveillance. Cover the northern ridge from there." He hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Be careful, Jennings, but you're ready." Careful. That word had taken on a new weight. It wasn't simply caution. It was a command to integrate mind, body, and awareness into a singular focus. Claire adjusted her pack, checked her weapon, and began moving toward high vantage point overlooking the eastern approach. Each step was deliberate, each decision calculated, as if the canyon itself tested her resolve. From her perch, she observed the enemy scouts through binoculars. They moved cautiously, trying to avoid exposure. Claire calculated angles, distances, probable escape routes, and cover. She whispered instructions into her radio, coordinating with soldiers below. Her voice was calm, authoritative, precise, a far cry from the nervous analyst who had first stepped into the canyon weeks ago. The first shot rang out from below, signaling engagement. Claire fired her rifle in controlled bursts, targeting movement, suppressing the scout's ability to advance. The enemy returned fire, using rocks and ridges for cover, but Claire's positioning gave her a clear advantage. Each shot was deliberate, precise, calculated, and informed by her analytical mind. The battlefield was no longer chaos. It was a series of patterns she could manipulate. The scouts attempted to flank the soldiers below. Claire anticipated the movement, firing into the path, forcing them back. She adjusted for wind, distance, and terrain, her instincts guided by both training and experience. Fear was still present, but it had become a tool rather than a hindrance, a lens sharpening her focus rather than clouding it. The firefight escalated. Bullets struck metal and stone, echoing through the canyon, dust and debris erupting around them. Claire's hands ached, lungs burned, but her mind remained clear. She was observing, calculating, and acting in real time. Every decision had immediate consequence, and she understood the weight of each choice. A young soldier faltered, panicked by the intensity of the engagement. Claire's voice cut through, calm but commanding. "Hold your position. Cover the ridge. Watch the boulders." Her instructions were followed immediately, and she felt a strange satisfaction, not from the violence, but from the clarity and control she exerted in the moment. Minutes passed in relentless focus. The scouts began to retreat, leaving behind evidence of their presence and echoes of their attempts to manipulate the battlefield. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, chest heaving, eyes scanning for residual threats. The canyon fell silent, save for the hum of the Humvees and the distant crackle of spent rounds. Around her, soldiers checked weapons, assessed injuries, and exchanged brief nods of acknowledgement. Claire had survived again, but more than survival, she had mastery. Back at the outpost, Claire cleaned her rifle with meticulous care. Each component, each mechanism, demanded attention, respect, and precision. She documented the engagement, noting enemy tactics, terrain features, and her own decisions. The notes were both analytical and introspective, a blend of data and experience. They captured not only what had occurred, but also her evolving understanding of herself and the battlefield. Later, alone, Claire reflected on the week's engagements. She thought about the canyon, the shadows, the echoes of gunfire, and the lives she had influenced through action and observation. Fear remained, a constant companion, but it had been transformed into clarity and focus. She understood the psychological weight of survival, the tension between instinct and calculation, and the consequences of every decision she had made. Her dreams were no longer chaotic. They were fragmented, yes, but they carried lessons. Each memory of gunfire, each flash of rifles, each shadow in the canyon was a pattern to study, to anticipate, to control. Claire realized that she had internalized the rhythm of the battlefield, understanding not only the terrain, but the human behaviors that defined it. She had become something new, a hybrid of analyst and soldier, observation and action intertwined. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon ridges, the sergeant approached. "You're not the same analyst who arrived here," he said. "You've learned to integrate action and observation. The unit trusts you. We trust you." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of both pride and responsibility. The canyon had taken innocence and replaced it with experience. It had forced her to act when fear would have paralyzed her. It had revealed a strength she had never known existed. She had survived. She had adapted. She had discovered herself fully in the crucible of danger. Over the following days, the canyon continued to test her. Patrols grew longer, engagements more frequent, and the psychological toll heavier. Claire learned to manage adrenaline, anticipate threats, and balance instinct with calculation. She discovered that survival demanded more than courage. It required discipline, patience, and the ability to integrate observation and action seamlessly. Her interactions with soldiers deepened. She guided them with insight, offering strategic recommendations, interpreting enemy behavior, and providing real-time support during engagements. They followed her lead, not just because of her rifle, but because of her clarity under pressure. She had earned their trust through action and insight, blending intellect with courage in a way few could match. At night, Claire wrote extensively in her notebook. She documented enemy movements, tactical patterns, terrain anomalies, and her own responses to danger. Each entry was a synthesis of observation and experience, a blueprint for understanding the canyon and its hidden threats. Her work was no longer purely academic. It was alive, immediate, and practical. Sleep remained elusive, but she accepted it as part of the price of understanding. Her mind replayed engagements, reviewing decisions, calculating outcomes, and refining strategies. The canyon had taught her to integrate fear, observation, and action into a singular focus, a lesson she could not unlearn. By the end of the week, Claire had fully embraced her dual role. She was both analyst and soldier, Observation and action intertwined. The canyon no longer intimidated her. It had become a landscape of challenges she could anticipate and navigate. She understood patterns in enemy behavior, terrain anomalies, and human reactions under stress. She had learned to act decisively, anticipate consequences, and maintain clarity in chaos. Claire Jennings had crossed the threshold from observer to participant. She had survived ambush, mastered the rhythm of battle, and discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. And though the canyon still demanded vigilance, courage, and precision, she felt ready for whatever lay ahead. Tomorrow, the canyon would challenge her again. But Claire was no longer naive, untested, or uncertain. She had discovered herself in fire and dust, in the echo of gunfire, in the weight of responsibility and survival. She had become the person the canyon required, vigilant, decisive, and unflinching. And she knew, without doubt, that the discoveries she had made about herself were just as vital as any intelligence gathered. The canyon lay quiet, deceptive in its calm. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the jagged ridges. Claire adjusted her rifle strap and checked her gear for the last time before the patrol. Each piece, the scope, the sights, the ammunition was familiar, almost comforting now. She had lived in the canyon long enough to know its moods, its subtle warnings, and its hidden threats. But today felt different. She could feel it in the air, the subtle tension vibrating. Beneath the hum of the Humvees, the sergeant briefed the team quietly. "We've identified a larger enemy unit moving through the southern pass. Intel suggests they're armed, mobile, and expecting resistance. This is our chance to intercept and disrupt their movement. Stay alert. Every decision counts." Claire nodded, the familiar rush of focus settling over her chest. Fear was present, yes, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to channel it, to convert it into clarity and precision. Her mind analyzed the canyon, overlaying enemy movement, terrain features, and potential escape routes. Every ridge, every shadow, every glint of rock was part of her map, a mental grid guiding her decisions. The convoy rolled into the canyon, engines humming, dust trailing in long curling veils. Claire scanned the ridges, noting patterns, predicting probable enemy positions. She whispered observations into her radio, coordinating with soldiers as they moved through the narrow pass. Every word, every instruction was measured, deliberate, informed by weeks of experience. She was no longer an observer. She was the strategist, the guide, the protector. Then the first shot rang out, sharp and unforgiving. Bullets whizzed past, striking rock, metal, and earth. Claire dropped low, rifle raised, eyes tracking movement with surgical precision. She fired, each shot calculated, suppressing enemy advances while buying the convoy time to maneuver. Around her, soldiers moved in sync, following both her instructions. And the sergeant's commands. The canyon erupted in chaos. Dust clouds rose, sunlight fractured through the rocks, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Claire's mind operated in dual tracks, instinctively reacting to immediate threats, while simultaneously analyzing patterns, anticipating movements, and calculating trajectories. Every decision had consequences. Every shot carried weight. An enemy squad attempted to flank the convoy through a narrow side pass. Claire anticipated the movement, firing precise rounds that forced them back behind cover. She shouted instructions into her headset, guiding soldiers with calm authority. "Cover the left. Don't let them cross the boulder ridge. I've got the right." Her words were executed instantly. Trust had been earned, and it was returned in coordinated action. The firefight intensified. Claire's body ached from recoil and adrenaline. Her lungs burned, but her focus never wavered. She was both participant and observer, analyst, and soldier. Mind and muscle fused into a single unit. Every movement of the enemy, every subtle shift in shadow, every irregularity in terrain became part of her awareness. She acted not blindly, but with calculated precision. A grenade landed near the rear Humvee, throwing debris and dust into the air. Claire ducked instinctively, then raised her rifle to cover a soldier scrambling to reload. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained sharp, calculating angles, wind, and timing. She realized that fear was no longer a threat. It was a tool, a guide sharpening every instinct. Minutes felt like hours. The enemy pressed, then faltered, then retreated, leaving behind the evidence of their attempt to manipulate the battlefield. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, scanning for any residual threats. The canyon fell silent, except for the hum of engines and the crackle of spent rounds. She felt the weight of exhaustion and the weight of responsibility intertwined. She had survived, yes, but she had also led, protected, and guided. Back at the outpost, Claire cleaned her rifle with meticulous care. Each part, each mechanism, received attention and respect. She recorded the engagement in her notebook, noting enemy tactics, terrain observations, and her own decisions. But her notes were no longer merely factual. They were reflective, introspective, capturing both external data and internal growth. She was documenting her transformation as much as the battlefield itself. Night fell over the canyon, shadows stretching across ridges like dark rivers. Claire sat outside her tent, notebook open, rifle resting at her side. She reflected on the journey, from timid analyst observing from a safe distance to a participant. In the crucible of combat, to a strategist and protector capable of decisive action. The canyon had demanded courage, precision, and intelligence, and she had answered every demand. Sleep was elusive, but Claire welcomed the restlessness. Her mind replayed each firefight, each decision, each moment of clarity amidst chaos. She visualized enemy movements, predicted responses, and reviewed every instruction she had given. The canyon had become a teacher, the battlefield a classroom, and she was both student and instructor. The following day, the canyon tested her again. A smaller, mobile enemy unit attempted to ambush the convoy along a narrow pass. Claire's eyes caught a subtle glint of weapon, reflecting sunlight, a shadow moving unnaturally. She fired first, suppressing the threat while signaling the soldiers below. Her actions were precise, deliberate, and effective. The unit executed her instructions flawlessly, reflecting the trust and respect she had earned over weeks of shared danger. The firefight was brief but intense. Claire felt the adrenaline coursing through her, muscles tense, mind sharp. She realized that she had fully internalized the duality she had once feared. Analysis and action were inseparable. Fear and courage, observation and execution, intellect and instinct, all had merged into a singular clarity. As the dust settled, Claire stood on a ridge overlooking the canyon. The sun cast golden light across jagged rocks, highlighting every ridge, every shadow, every path. She could see the subtle signs of previous ambushes, the tracks of enemy scouts, the patterns of survival etched into the landscape. She understood the canyon now, not as an observer, not as a novice, but as someone fully immersed in its lessons. The sergeant approached, nodding silently. "You've grown beyond anything I expected," he said. "You're no longer just an analyst. You're a soldier, a leader, someone the unit trusts completely." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood the cost, the responsibility, and the consequence of every decision. But she also understood her own strength. She had faced fear, embraced action, and discovered clarity. She had survived, adapted, and grown. She had become the person the canyon demanded, forged in the crucible of fire, dust, and shadow. That night, Claire wrote her final entry in the notebook she had kept since arriving. She documented not only enemy positions, patterns, and tactical observations, but also the personal journey she had undertaken. She wrote about fear transformed into focus, terror transformed into clarity, and observation transformed into decisive action. She reflected on the canyon's lessons: courage, calculation, trust, and the integration of mind and body in the pursuit of survival and protection. As she closed the notebook and cleaned her rifle one last time, Claire felt a sense of completion. She had crossed the line from analyst to participant, from observer to protector, from fear to mastery. The canyon had tested her, demanded of her, and in return revealed her true capabilities. She was no longer merely a visitor in this crucible. She was part of its rhythm, its logic, its life and death calculus. Morning arrived with a quiet promise. Claire slung her rifle over her shoulder, standing tall, eyes scanning the canyon. With calm certainty, the unit prepared for the next patrol, but Claire knew this. She had discovered herself in the crucible of combat, in the echo of gunfire, and in the weight of responsibility. She had learned that observation alone was not enough. Action alone was not enough. Only their fusion could ensure survival, clarity, and purpose. The canyon stretched before her, jagged and alive, a final test that would always demand vigilance. But Claire was ready. She had crossed thresholds of fear, precision, and action that she had never imagined. She had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. She had become fully, irrevocably, herself a soldier, an analyst, a survivor. And as the convoy moved into the canyon, engines humming, dust rising, Claire raised her rifle in silent readiness. She was prepared. She was focused. She was Claire Jennings, forged in fire, tempered by fear, sharpened by clarity, and fully alive in the crucible of discovery. The canyon would continue to challenge her, but she would continue to rise to meet it. Fear transformed into focus, observation transformed into action, and life transformed into understanding. She had become exactly what the canyon required: vigilant, decisive, unflinching, and unbroken.